Okay, so I think this segues nicely into the next question I want to ask you about. So, a lot of people, this question manifests itself in different ways,
Yep.
but essentially it's just like information overload. I'm learning a new language. There's too much stuff to focus on. Like, I need to learn new grammar rules, need to acquire all this new vocabulary, like with English, phrasal verbs, and all of that stuff, pronunciation. How would you try to like triage some of that? And what recommendations would you give to, let's say, like a beginning Brazilian student that's learning English?
Yeah.
They don't know what to focus on. How would
Yeah.
you approach that?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's start with this. You start with the yin and the yang. There's the input and there's the output. You're either speaking or writing, which would be your producing, your outputting, right? Or you're listening to the other person speak back to you, or watching a show, you're listening, or you're reading something. Right? So there's those four corners. And then there's the sort of ever-present, the theoretical element, which is, well, what about the language itself, the grammar of the language, the vocabulary of the language, my learning strategy, phrasal verbs, and whatever else it may be, my pronunciation, my accent, and so on and so forth. So there's those four main sort of skills: listening, speaking, reading, writing, right? And then there's the sort of the study element. I would say that every one of those activities, speaking, listening, reading, writing, can help the other, right? If I read a lot, it helps my speaking because I can draw from what I've been reading, right? If I listen, it helps me speak. If I speak more, it helps my writing, and so on and so forth. I also think that if you want to get better at speaking, then speak most. If you feel like your reading's a little off, then read more. But it's not necessarily the case that if you want your speaking to be better, then do more flashcards, right? Spend more time on the app because I want to. So it's like they say in sports, you got to practice like you play.
Yeah. I think the idea of reading, writing, the different inputs and outputs, they're not totally disconnected. Like you said, if you practice your writing, it's probably going to help you in some other auxiliary ways.
Right.
But the easiest way is to decide what you need to focus on and then focus on that input or output.
Yep. There's a thought experiment I like to put out there sometimes, which is this: pretend a magical genie made you, quote, fluent in XYZ language right now, right? So we wave a magic wand, and now, Foster, you can speak Mandarin, Cantonese, Chinese, or something completely fluently, right? Next question I would say is, what would you do then? I mean, that's the dream, right? So, okay, what would you do next? I'm fluent in Cantonese. I would be in Chinatown, Chicago right now, trying it out.
Yeah.
You know? And what would I be talking about? Well, I could talk about the weather. I could talk about where I could meet, so on and so forth. And so once I've walked through that visualization of what does my life look like? What am I doing different? Whom am I speaking with? And what am I saying and to whom? Is the big, what am I saying and to whom? Once I've walked through that, just in visualizations, theoretically, then I can retrace my steps and go, okay, well then, I'm going to learn to say this and I'm going to go do that. So I'm thinking very practically, what do I want to do with this language? And then start by doing that, or at least taking steps toward that direction.
Absolutely. I remember the first time we spoke, that was the phrase that most stuck with me. It's when you said, what am I saying, or what do I want to say and to whom?
What do you want to say and to whom? It's like the ultimate beacon mantra. What do I want to, because then you realize, well, what phrasal verbs do I really need most? What grammar what vocab do I need most? What skills do I need to practice? All of that gets answered.
Yeah. So I think that's a super valuable thing, just to distill this whole game down to its core. But I still think even when I've kind of adopted this and tried to run this thought experiment on a lot of my students, and even after answering that questions, a lot of times they still need a push. For example, let's say we have a Brazilian from Sao Paulo. He knows a little bit of English, but he really needs to improve to get a better job, and he wants to work abroad. Say he works in IT, something with computers, and he has a lot of job opportunities abroad. When he already kind of has that first question answered, like, okay, if I learned this, I would be speaking to customers and clients in the US. Then where would you try to push him? because it's hard for people to individually pick out like, okay, I need to learn all the vocabulary about like software development. Yeah.
Okay. So we know what we want to say. I want to talk to customers, talk with other, businesses, clients or whatever it may be. What comes next? Well, the next thing I would say, we began by we were completely zoomed out with just, what do you want to say and to whom? Throw that onto the table.
Yeah.
And then, okay, now I want to, so what I would do then is zoom all the way in and say, okay, well then let's walk through this situation. I'm a customer and we start to just build the situation. Pretty soon the person is going to say, now let's pretend they know. If they know zero, then we might have to start with some basic verbs, basic vocabulary. Here's how the general structure is. But let's say that they have, some English and enough so that we can kind of jump into a situation. We're in that situation. Every thought that you're ever going to need to express has a verb nucleus. I can predict to you what verb nucleus I'm going to need based on the topic. So if Foster, you said, Tony, let's talk about our favorite foods. I know I'm going to need the verb nucleus. I like X, Y, Z.
Yeah. When you say verb nucleus, just to clarify for our listeners, what do you mean by that?
Well, you know how the protons and the electrons and and everything's like they orbit around the nucleus, the center.
Mm-hmm.
Your vocabulary orbits around the nucleus or around the verb.
Yeah.
A sentence or me trying to express a thought without a verb is like a body without any bones. Like if I just said to you, Foster, tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the coffee shop. Awesomely.
Coffee.
I don't know, like all adverbs. You're going to go, what? Okay, what about it? I mean, there's nothing pinning it down. I'm going to see you there. We're meeting there. We're talking there. We're going there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have that feeling when they start speaking in the language that's the way they sound, like dog, fun.
Right. People tend to leave out a verb. There's this whole stage of language learners, like this whole stage of the process where people tend to leave out the verb. And so I'm saying focus on the verb first, like choose the verb first. Let's talk about your favorite foods. Know that you're going to say gostuji. You're choose the verb first and then pivot around the verb. Because once you've got your sometimes I like to say, it's like you put your foot on the verb. You step down on the verb, put your weight on that foot. Now your other foot is free to pivot. I like Brazilian. I like Mexican food. I like this food. I like that. I like this. I like that.
Yeah.
When it's time to change the thought, you take the next step. Put the foot down on. Have you tried X? Have you tried Y? Have you tried Z? Yes, I have. No, I haven't tried X, Y, Z. So we're basically walking through the conversation verb by verb.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean when I say verb nucleus.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I see this all the time too, like language learners that have like an expansive vocabulary, but for some reason they still like don't know verbs at all.
Right.
And I think that tendency to hide away from verbs, a lot of it is like, verb conjugations, that's scary. You tend to be much more articulate explaining that verb conjugations are not as complex as we may think.
Right.
So how would you deal with that when people, we start having that conversation and I said, oh, have you been there? And they're like, have you been there? Sure. Oh my God.
Right.
What is that?
Right. Most methods do this, and our listeners can probably relate to this. Most methods will begin with one tense, like present tense, and bring out a verb, like I speak, you speak, he speaks, she speaks, we speak, y'all speak, use guys, they speak, right? Falu, fala, falam, and you got people going back and forth trying to figure that. And then what they'll do is bring in the next verb. So now let's conjugate this verb and this verb and this verb and this verb. And now here's a whole list of verbs but now here are the irregular ones too. And you haven't even taken a step off of the present tense yet.
Yeah.
So what I'm going to do, what I definitely do is instead of looking at one tense and all the persons and all the verbs, I'm going to just take one verb and just one person and look at all of the tenses and the aspects.
I think that's so awesome. Yeah.
Because then you get to see the cross section of the entire language. The metaphor I like to use there is that if you're learning to play chess, I'm not going to spend 50 hours playing games with just one piece on the board, because that's not, I need to see I need to see the big picture. And I'll just do that with the first person. So I want to know how to say I spoke, I speak, I will speak, I would speak, I was speaking, I am speaking, I will be speaking, I would be speaking, I had spoken, I have spoken, I will have spoken, I will, would have been spoken. Hold on.
would have been spoken.
Hold on. Don't listen to me.
Even teachers aren't fluent 100% of the time.
Yeah, dude. That's where my fluency I'm no longer fluent in this moment.
Yeah.
But I want to see the cross section. Same in Portuguese. Falei, falo, vou falar. Estava falando, estou falando, vou estar falando. Tinha falado, já falei. Terei falado. Right? Because once I've built those parameters, now you can start to make variations, bring in the second person.
Absolutely. I think
bring in new verbs.
It's a great way to kind of like streamline the process of learning grammar without having to actually understand anything about it. So if you say like, I said, I spoke, most people would be like, why is it spoke? But it's the same thing in Portuguese. If you say like, eu falo, eu falei. If I say like, why did you say falei? They're like, I don't know, it's in the past.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like looking at the map of the language. I want to know where the top left-hand corner ends, top right, bottom left, bottom. I want to know the complete.
Absolutely. So I think if someone has a lot of things to focus on, the big thing that I'm getting from you is to enter into conversations. Verbs are going to be essential. Start with one verb, sure, and then just cross-examine the shit out of it.
Check out exactly. Check out the complete tense aspect matrix. This is a thing that I publish. People can check out. And Foster, I think I've sent you these things.
That's very cool.
I make a spreadsheet and just at a glance be able to know what is past, present, future, simple, continuous, and perfect at a glance. And then from there, jump back into conversation and let the conversation, the randomness and the demands of the conversation tell you what you needed most and tell you what you need now.
Exactly. I think your last conversation should dictate what you need to study next.
Beautiful.
Not like guessing what you need to study.
Beautiful. Yes. Not just because the next chapter in the book says, now you got to learn.
Talking about vegetables.
Yes. But your last conversation, I think that's the summary right there, Fox. Like you hit the nail on the head. Let your last conversation, everyone out there, let the last conversation dictate what you learn next. Beautiful.